Hello everybody and welcome to this webinar on collecting data from an Office 365 source. My name is John Pearson. I'll be presenting this webinar today. Before we get started, let's look at what we have coming up. So on June 26, we have my colleague Mal Ortiz from Valm giving a presentation on reporting in W4. If you have not done so already, you can register for that webinar after this call. For today, we'll be looking at collecting data from an Office 365 source and some of the issues that can arise during that process. For clarity, we have muted everyone's microphone. If you do have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat area and we'll cover them off at the end of the presentation. So Office 365 can be used in a few different ways. Firstly, the user can install Office 365 on their system, then have it set up to save the documents and other user-created data online to OneDrive. The second way of using Office 365 is to run the apps over the internet. So it's like you log on to Office 365, you run your apps in there, and in those cases, the data is also stored online to OneDrive as well. Lastly, the other configuration is to have Office 365 installed on your system, but have it set up so that all documents and user-created data are stored locally on the system. So the Office 365 source collection feature that we have in Intella is for when the data is stored on OneDrive. If the data is stored on the local system, then you're going to need to use the file or folder option to collect that type of data, if that makes sense. So pretty much this is going to be a demonstration type of webinar. The Intella side of Office 365 is actually quite simple. There's not a lot to it. But before you can use Intella to connect to and index Office 365 data, you first need to enable access to the Office 365 source. And that's all done in the Azure portal. So that is what we'll take a look at next. But we'll first talk about the different types of access. So there are two ways to provide access when we get into the portal. So one is by user account and two is by application. So the by user account method is used when you want to connect to a single account, typically just a standalone account. The by application method is used when you need to gain access to multiple accounts which are managed as one group, a bit like a company subscription. Note that you may need to use that option even if you are connecting to a single account if that account is part of that sort of group subscription. So for this presentation, I'll show you how to configure the settings to allow access for an application, not a single account. We have instructions on our community forum for how to set up a single account. They've been there for some time. What I'm going to show today is not actually on the forum, but we have the documentation all ready to put up there. So that will be up there in the next day or two. Now there is a disclaimer. Note that we are not Azure experts in any way, and this part of the presentation actually has nothing to do with Intella. It is why we have tickets and people, support tickets coming in with people not being able to connect to Office 365. It is all part of that, but it has nothing to do with Intella. So it's all to do with Azure. The presentation shows some settings and permissions inside Azure, but we don't go into a lot of detail in there. And it's really up to the end user to research those permissions to gain a full understanding of what they do basically before you use them. Okay, so I'll bring that down. So the first thing we need to do before we even start Intella is to log into the Azure portal. And I've done that here. And the first thing we need to do then is to go into the Active Directory option here. And what I'm going to do is I've just made a text file that I'll bring up here. And I'll just explain a bit about this. So we're going to go into Azure, we're going to do some settings, we're going to create what we call a crawler. And there's some information when we create this crawler, or sort of a permission thing so that Intella can access the account. That information we need to put into this text file because we're going to need that later on when we actually fire up Intella and go and connect to the source. So I've got application ID, tenant ID and password fields here that I need to fill in as we go through this. So because we're doing this as a the application method, we need to register a new application. So this is the first step. We go new registration, and you can call this anything you like. I'm going to call it crawler. In fact, I'm going to call it webinar as well, so I know that it's the crawler that I created during the webinar. And then click on register. So that's kind of the first step. That's the most simplest step. Now this video is being recorded. It'll be up on the website as well, and we'll have instructions for this process up there. You might get a little bit lost in here because it is a bit technical, but you can always go back and review the video later. So we have our webinar crawler set up, and I call it a crawler because that's sort of what Intella does. It's going to go into the data and it's going to crawl it and pull everything back and put it into the case. The first thing I need to do is I need to collect this application ID and this directory tenant ID. So there's a little box that pops up here. We're going to copy that. We're going to copy that into our text file. And I also want the tenant ID because we're going to need that. And the password, we'll talk about the password in a minute. Okay, so the second step is we need to add some redirect URIs, and that's just this link over here on the right. And we need to add a couple of platforms in this screen. So first platform, we click on the Add Platform button. We go over to the right and we've got the web application here, so let's click on that. Now this field here can have anything in it. Let me just copy this. I've just got a localhost URL, but you can put anything in here. It just can't be empty. And then we go down to access tokens, and we need to tick that box. And then we go down and click on the configure button. So that's our first application or platform. And then we need to create another one. And this second one is mobile and desktop applications. And again, we need to put something in this box. Now this one's a little bit different. I've put in the same URL here, but we need to make this HTTPS. Now if it's not HTTPS, then it won't work. So just make sure you set that correctly. Then go back down to configure. And we have our two applications here. All these other settings can be the same apart from the bottom here. So treat application as a public client. We need to turn that on. And then we need to go and save this. So that's kind of step 2. Got a green tick. Every time you see a green tick, that's good. That's one step closer for this working. Okay, so now we need to create a password. So we go to certificates and secrets. And we go to new client secret. Again, in here, you can type anything you want. I'm going to put access to all data. If this is a temporary thing, one year is fine. Probably in any case, it'll be fine for 1 year. And we click on add. and you have the password here. Now it's important to copy this now and put it in your text file, because I've seen later on when I go back into the screen that you can't access this value anymore. So that's the password, and the next part of it is the permissions that we need to set. So over on the left, we need to go to API permissions. And there's already a permission in here, but this one can be deleted because we don't need this one. So go to the three dots on the right-hand side and go remove permission, and then we have to confirm that. Okay, and we're going to add a permission. Now, in this demonstration, I'm going to just add one permission, and the one permission is going to let us put these credentials into Intella and connect to that Office 365 source, and we're going to be able to see the directory structure up there. Now you need a lot more permissions to be able to access data and pull it down, and we will put the other permissions that you need on the website once we have it updated. But just be aware that we won't be adding all the permissions in today because there's quite a few permissions with different settings, and that would take some time. So I'll show you one, and I'll show you what you need to do for one, and then after that you'd be able to do the rest of them following the guide on our forum site. So click on add a permission. We need to add the Microsoft Graph, and we're setting this up as a application. So it's the application permissions. Remember, it's not the sort of user side, it's the application. Let's scroll down to the bottom here, and we have user. And in this case, I'm going to select the user.read.all permission here and click on add permissions, and that has added that permission. That's the only one you need to make sure that Intella is going to be able to connect to the source. Now, this isn't finished yet because we got not granted for the account that I'm logged on as. So every time you add a permission, you need to grab the admin consent for that account. So click on that box there and confirm. And again, we get a green tick, which means that it's good. All right, so that's the Azure side. And remember, that's only one permission. So there's a few more permissions that need to be added in, which you'll need to do to get full access to the data set. So now we can go and see how all this works in Intella. So let me just open up a case, not that one. So this case here, so this is an empty case. There's no sources in here, and we pretty much just go through the add new source wizard. So sources, add new. We're going to click on the Office 365 option, obviously, and this is the screen that we have for our user credentials. So let's bring up our text box. So I'm going to copy the application ID. Now the username is a mix of the application ID and the tenant ID. So I'm going to paste the application ID in there first, but we also need the application ID here as well. So let's put it there. Let's go back to our text file and grab the tenant ID. And we're going to put the colon symbol in there, put our tenant ID in there, and the last step is our password that we generated. Put in there. Now the next button is grayed out still. Intella's not going to let you go through the rest of the add source settings until it knows that it can actually access this account. So that's what this button up the top here is for. So let's click on that. And again, green tick, everything is good here. Successfully connected. This is what you need to see before you can move on. Now, if you get to the stage and you've got a red X, or you've got errors or authentication issues, access denied issues, anything like that, then it's something to do with the settings in Azure that need to be fixed. Maybe you didn't add the right permission, or didn't tick a box somewhere, or didn't save something. So that needs to be fixed before you go any further here. Just for this example, I'll show you what it's like once we get in there. So the next step, you get to the screen. In fact, in the new version that's coming out, there's another screen that pops up before this. It's not in this current version, but it will be in the next version, and it has a date filter. So some people have asked, can we collect items from Office 365 but specify a date in which they can be, the date range for items to be indexed, and that's what we have in the next version. So it's a good feature to have. Okay, so that's the sort of the group or company subscription, and these are the accounts there. And I know that this account here has OneDrive and Outlook with it, but as I go down here, you can see that I can't really see anything in there apart from folders. And that's just because I've only added the one permission. Once you add all of the necessary permissions, then you'll be able to see all the information in here. And then basically what you'd do is you'd select whichever mailboxes or data that you need to collect, and then you go through the rest of the wizard. And the rest of the wizard is just what you have every time you add a source to Intella. So it's only the first part which is dedicated to the Office 365. So I'm going to cancel that, and I'm going to bring up the screen here, which is basically that account with the permissions, all of the permissions that I used to index. And this was that user account that we just looked at, but we only saw the folders, and we can see that there's OneDrive data in there, and there's also some Outlook data in there. And that stuff is all indexed up in Intella now, and you can open it and search it and print it and do whatever you need to do. So that's a demonstration on most of it is working in Azure, and that needs to be done by the person at the company to give access, and actually adding the 365 account to Intella or connecting to it in Intella itself is not really a big part of it. So it's the demonstration. Okay, so this is our forum site, and this is what we have up there now. Remember, this is only the first method, which is collecting from a single account, and over the next day or so we will add this new information up there for more of the group subscriptions. So issues and limitations. Well, the first one's obvious. Online sources can only be indexed if your system has internet access. That's kind of obvious. Microsoft often change the way you allow access to Office 365 and resources. So we see this kind of a bit. It's really nothing we can control, and this is sort of some of the problems we see in support as well. So they might add some new settings, they might remove some settings, they might change something, and then for some reason people follow the guide and they can't connect to the Office 365 source. And then when they come into support, we look at the issue and we can see that some things have changed, and then we can update our documentation to make it all work again. So number 3, the settings and the look of Azure changes. So screenshots in our guides might look different. That's sort of similar to number 2. So we update those as we do. This is something we're always a little bit behind the 8 ball. We can't test this every day. It's very inefficient. So we just have to wait for changes when the changes come, and we have to sort of deal with them at the time. And this is sort of a golden rule here. If you have any access denied errors or any other errors on that Intella screen when you click that first button to check the connection, then something's not right with your Azure settings. If you've followed the guides and it doesn't work, certainly put in a support ticket because maybe Microsoft have changed something again. If they haven't changed something and it's working fine when we test it, then maybe it's something to do with your your settings in Azure. And this is something that, when, as I said, we're not experts in this, probably a question more for your internal IT, Azure support person, or maybe you need to reach out to Microsoft to, Azure support itself for assistance in those cases. Yeah, that's the presentation. Let me just check to see if there are any questions. And it doesn't look like there's any questions today. So once again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining this webinar and keep an eye out for the next webinar. And thank you very much.